Hello and welcome to ILTV's Israel Daily. I'm Aaron Porras, and coming up in today's newscast, filibusters and ultra-Orthodox demands threatening to foil the coming coalition before it begins. Meanwhile, the IDF rejecting renewed accusations of intent and motive following the accidental shooting death of a 16-year-old Palestinian girl. And finally, ancient discoveries providing first-of-its-kind evidence to corroborate the biblical story of the Maccabees. It seems the fight to form a government is far from over for the would-be incoming coalition, as outgoing coalition members are thwarting key movements in the Knesset. The vote to install a new Knesset speaker delayed at the last minute from Monday to Tuesday. Current Prime Minister Lapid and his partners threatening to filibuster, with news that they may continue to threaten filibuster again. And without a new Knesset speaker, Netanyahu and his allies cannot bring to a vote the three changes needed to fulfill coalition agreements between them, among which the so-called override bill, which would enable Netanyahu to appoint MKs with criminal and corruption charges to serve as ministers, like Shas party head Aryeh Deri. And this brings us to the second, arguably more important move against the new government. Lapid saying that his party would seek to bar 4 lawmakers from voting on the bill, arguing that Deri, Netanyahu, and at least 2 other Likud members, quote, had a serious conflict of interest due to the criminal indictments against them. And if Lapid's bid to the Knesset legal staff is successful, Netanyahu's bloc would be short of a majority to pass the bills they want. And now with more on the latest political shakeup, former member of the Likud party and president of the Likud Supreme Court, Michael Kleiner. Michael, it's great to have you back on the show with us. Now, in the last hour or so, Yariv Levin was elected Knesset Speaker, at least temporarily, meaning the filibuster threat proved ineffectual. But what do you make of Lapid's attempts to slow down, at least, the coming coalition? How long can these games hold up?
These are not games. This is the democracy. Their opposition, their role is to try and make it complicated and hard for the government to pass bills, and it's okay, and they will use every parliamentary trick they have available, and there are some, but at the end of the day, in a democracy, the majority decides, and Likud has a majority, Likud coalition has a majority, so those bills will pass.
Also, Lapid's bigger move, I think, is trying to bar Netanyahu and Deri and at least 2 other lawmakers from the Likud from voting on the override bill due to supposed conflict of interest. Does this argument hold water?
No. It's members of Knesset vote in the plenary all the time. This is a role. If you would start to bar them from votes, it doesn't have an ending. It can be in a committee, but it's a plenary. Every Knesset member has a right to vote, and the public judges their votes, and if they have a conflict of interest or they don't have, but nobody can prevent a member of Knesset to exercise his right to vote. This is one of the most basic laws of the Israeli parliamentary system.
So there's no way that Lapid could actually even bar Netanyahu and Deri from this vote. Is that what you're saying?
No, they can try to appeal to the Supreme Court, and but I believe the Supreme Court won't interfere in those decisions. After the Knesset will take a decision, maybe they will try to appeal against the law in the Supreme Court, and then the Supreme Court will discuss. Today, precedents are that Supreme Court intervenes sometimes and abolished laws that were made by the Knesset, but this is a rarity. And in the case of Deri, they will not intervene because the accusations this time against Deri are so minor. It's an charge without intent, and he didn't know that there was a tax misrepresentation, so he had no intention to do it, so there's no shame with what he has done.
Well, so regardless...
I, by the way, believe the law was unnecessary. because if they would approach...
Michael, regardless of Deri's guilt or innocence, that I think is even a lesser point. But speaking of the override clause, which would allow him to assume a ministerial position, what was decided exactly? How many or how few votes would it take under the new overall clause to overrule the High Court? I'm assuming there's a draft floating around now that the time to pass it is dwindling.
No, there's a misunderstanding. The law that they are trying to pass before the bringing in of the government, swearing in of the government, is a bill that is a technical bill that says that if he is sentenced to prison on not to be performed, so it will be not counted. As I said, he can approach the head of the election committee, Mr. Amit, and he would have taken this decision. Actually, this legislation is actually unnecessary, but they are afraid of the Supreme Court judge. I believe the fear has no base, and I am sure that the Judge Amit would have said that Deri can serve as a minister.
All right, Michael Kleiner, thank you so much for joining us again today. Now, in a tragic incident, a young teenage Palestinian girl killed in the crossfire between Israeli forces and Palestinian Islamic Jihad militants in Jenin. Following initial inquiry, the IDF determining that they indeed likely accidentally shot 16-year-old Palestinian Jana Zakarna as she was found to be on a roof adjacent to Palestinian gunmen. This as Israeli security forces continuing Operation Break the Wave, in which 18 wanted individuals, including 3 terror suspects, arrested overnight Monday, despite heavy resistance. The Palestinians firing live rounds, stones, and explosives at the Israeli troops amidst the clashes. The United States and the international community jumping on Zakarna's death, however, with Washington calling for accountability, similar to calls after the death of Palestinian-American journalist Shireen Abu Akleh. Then the Palestinian Authority, meanwhile, calling on visiting UN officials to place Israel on the blacklist of countries that mistreat children in armed conflict. Aside from the international community, though, Israeli officials themselves sharply condemning and mourning the death. The IDF reiterating that the claim that security forces intentionally fire at uninvolved civilians is implausible and without foundation. And the IDF and its commanders regret any harm to civilians, including those who are in combat environments in close proximity to armed terrorists during exchanges of fire. And now with more on the death of 16-year-old Jana Zakarna, former senior legal advisor to the IDF Legal Department, Lieutenant Colonel Reserves David Benjamin. David, thank you so much for being with us. Will anything happen to the IDF shooter? What, if anything, any supposed justice will the Zakarna family receive?
Well, at the outset, there will always be an investigation, what we call an operational debriefing. That's not an official criminal investigation, but in every such case, there will be such an investigation as a start. The results of that investigation will be brought before the Military Advocate General, and her job is to decide whether the findings warrant the opening of a criminal investigation by the military police. I don't think we've reached that stage yet. Again, on the face of it, I don't know if we have any material which would suggest that the killing was somehow deliberate, intentional, or somehow violating the laws of Israel or international law, but that remains to be seen as a result of the investigation.
Now, I mean, it's my understanding that Israel goes through great lengths to reduce the number of potential civilian casualties. We know of the roof knocker bombs. We know of dropping pamphlets from above before certain strikes. Did that not happen in Breaking the Wave? Is that not occurring?
Well, this is a very different situation. Actually, the legal situation that applies here is that which was addressed by the Israeli Supreme Court back in 2006 on what's known as the targeted killings judgment, which set out the circumstances under which terrorist operatives may be lawfully targeted. And actually, the court ruled that in situations like this, where arrest is feasible, then actually terrorists may not be targeted. So I would say it's quite obvious, if that's the standard, that terrorists themselves may not be killed unless arresting them is not a feasible option. then certainly civilians may not be harmed. That goes without saying. In most of these operations, the aim is to arrest perpetrators of terrorist activity, ongoing terror activity, and it's always based on actionable intelligence. And I think actually the fact that our forces encounter armed resistance and getting to these firefights, very fierce firefights, actually just vindicates the intelligence. The fact that these raids are justified. Of course, they do have tragic results, and that's maybe a statistical probability because they take place invariably in highly populated urban areas.
Right. So the United States now and the international community as a whole is calling for more accountability, quote unquote, similar to the calls after the death of journalist Shireen Abu Akleh. Do you see this story really blowing up internationally in the same way?
Well, perhaps what set Shireen Abu Akleh's tragic death aside was the fact that she was A, a journalist, and B, an American citizen. So that would kind of add to the lobby elements who would be involved in the investigation, in complaining about the circumstances of her death. The young woman in question who was killed recently, as far as I know, she's not an American citizen or a journalist. She unfortunately falls into the statistic of innocent people, assuming the Palestinian version of events is true, that she was just going up on the roof to look for a pet. She falls under that very tragic statistic of civilians who get caught up in crossfire or just in the wrong place at the wrong time, but probably won't be subject to the same level of interest and scrutiny as the case of Shireen Abu Akleh.
All right, now Ramallah wants the United Nations to name Israel on its child-abusing blacklist, and the United Nations, based on previous rhetoric, even from UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, seems keen to listen. What do you make of this?
As far as the United Nations is concerned, I would say a large part of the United Nations, not all UN bodies, but a majority of them perhaps, they are pretty much a lost cause as far as Israel is concerned. It wouldn't be the first time that Israel has been blacklisted in some forum or other. Of course, it would be very rich for the Palestinians to be proposing that blacklisting, considering the fact that there are plenty known documented instances of children being abused, recruited, used in all sorts of ways for military purposes and terrorism purposes on the Palestinian side, as human shields and as actual military operatives. But there really is no end to the cynicism of these bodies. So I wouldn't be surprised if that were to occur. Of course, I hope it doesn't. It just adds another level to the delegitimization of Israel, which is occurring all over the place.
All right, Lieutenant Colonel Benjamin, thank you so much again for joining us.
Pleasure.
Now, the Biden administration is finally listening to Congress, American Jewish groups, and his own administration affiliates in announcing the formation of a new interagency coalition to counter anti-Semitism. The decision coming after several groups urging for a quote-unquote whole government approach, as similarly called for during Second Gentleman Emhoff's roundtable event at the White House last week, and in a bipartisan letter, of course, signed by some 125 lawmakers as well. The letter reading that, quote, because many individual agencies play a critical role in combating anti-Semitism, closer coordination is needed to share best practices and intelligence and to identify gaps, streamline overlapping roles, and execute a unified national strategy. Then as for the new coalition's tasks, its first order of business is reportedly to develop a national strategy to counter anti-Semitism, including raising understanding about its threat to Jews and to all Americans. Then the strategy will be to address anti-Semitic harassment and abuse online and offline, to prevent attacks, and to encourage the building of a more inclusive nation. That said, even as Jews continue to be attacked at a vastly disproportionate rate in the United States, the White House is adding that the new agency will also notably look at countering other types of discrimination, specifically Islamophobia. And now to tech news. Startup Nation Central hosting a unique tech challenge in Tel Aviv, focusing on healthcare innovation. And the winner is set to see their product piloted across the United States. Gabby Weiniger with the details.
A health tech challenge winner. iKnow detects positive and negative caregiver behavior by processing video feeds from CCTV. using AI and computer vision algorithms.
I was selected to be the finalist and challenged by Henry Ford to reduce burnout. And we pitched our solution, which is based also on some research that shows that there's a direct link between aggression and violence to staff burnout. And luckily we won, so I was pretty happy about it.
Segi's Prize will see his product piloted to work with Henry Ford Health to further develop their solution and enter the US market.
COVID was difficult for everyone, especially healthcare systems. Nursing really took it on the chin with this, and there are 3 million nursing vacancies in the US alone. We are trying to make their life a little bit easier, make their work more efficient, more rewarding, and safer. We want to move the ball in nursing care.
Henry Ford Health partnered with Startup Nation Central to create the Tech Challenge.
I was introduced to Startup Nation a decade ago as a partner for us to solve healthcare's biggest challenges. We've worked pretty extensively with them. This is our second challenge that we have done, and I'd like to say the most successful one to date. But they've introduced us to hundreds of companies here in the state of Israel.
Sharon leads the global healthcare activities at SNC. She explained how they help innovative companies collaborate.
We looked for early stage Israeli startup, and this is our way to find business opportunity for Israeli startup with the US healthcare organization and create more and more opportunity for them to penetrate the US market.
The other 4 finalists included an AI-based optimization tool, an app that logs reports by speech, and bots that safely deliver medicine.
I have over 20 years experience in healthcare, and I experienced it personally, this problem, the problems of medication errors. And so this solution came to me from the field. Our product identify pills, identify capsules and other medications, and identify patients. So it's very hard to do error with our solution.
This marks the second challenge collaboration between Startup Nation Central and Henry Ford.
I've always enjoyed coming and using the vast intellect of the innovation ecosystem here in Israel, rivaled across the world in that as problem solvers for us. We don't have all the answers in that, and I'm hoping to get some great and bright answers that we can implement initially in our hospital and ultimately globally.
And they're expecting many more tech challenges to come in the future.
Now, speaking of innovation and learning, the Ulpan Or organization for years has been teaching students to speak Hebrew in unique and engaging ways. And joining me to tell me his experience, Dr. Bernard Kamenetsky, medical director at MDVIP Incorporated and student of Ulpan Or. Doctor, thank you so much for being with us. Why did you choose to study Hebrew, and how did you choose to study at Ulpan Or? What about their curriculum appealed to you?
And good afternoon. Yeah, thanks so much for giving me the opportunity to talk about it. I've had a lifelong interest in Hebrew. I went to day school, and at that time, I went to a school that had a practice of Ivrit Bivrit, which meant that from 8:30 until noon every day, we only spoke Hebrew only. And so the foundation for children who finished 8th grade there was very good, but most of my peers did not keep it up and let it lapse. And I've always had an interest in trying to maintain my Hebrew. And then many years ago, I don't know exactly when Ulpan Or started, but it's a very long time ago. I think I saw an ad in Israel on a lamppost, and I got in touch with them. And at that time, of course, we don't have all the technology that we have today, and learning was in person. But when I had the opportunity to be in Israel, I started with them. And what I always found very intriguing about them is their being cutting edge in terms of technology. Even early on, before there was streaming video, just the multitude of audio tools that were available were very helpful.
Right,
and go sure.
No, I mean, I was going to say, tell me more about the learning experience at Ulpan Or, the unique teaching methods, the teachers, the courses. I mean, it sounds like, yeah.
Well, sure. I think what's unique about Ulpan Or, and I don't have a frame of reference, but I do speak to other people who've had other experiences. And I think that Many times people learn a foreign language kind of in a vacuum. They're learning vocabulary, they're learning grammar, but it's very limited the exposure one gets to in terms of learning a foreign language if it's divorced from the culture that it's coming from. And there are many people in the U.S. who lament the fact that American Jews have such a profound unfamiliarity with Hebrew, which is a deterrent for them appreciating Israeli culture, Israeli problems, security issues. I mean, there are a lot of ramifications. Jews know a lot more about the U.S. and the diaspora community than the diaspora community knows about Israel. And I think one of the unique aspects of Ulpan Or is the integration of cultural phenomenon. There's something called an e-tone, which is a weekly newspaper that one can do at varying levels. And there are always articles, either cultural, political, entertainment, and it gives one the opportunity not just to learn Hebrew, but to learn Hebrew in the context of Israeli culture, which I think is unique and makes a huge difference.
Well, so what was most challenging then about learning Hebrew for you, especially in recent years? Is it the language itself, the accent, the pronunciation, the reading, the writing, or was it the context, as you've alluded to?
Okay, so the miftah will always be American.
The accent,
Golda Meir's was, and I know that to this day there are jokes about it and videos about it, so I'm not embarrassed by that. The biggest challenge for me was I had an ambitious goal. I didn't want to just be able to have speak Hebrew conversationally. I wanted to be able to watch TV, to read a newspaper, to progress to even reading a book, the amount of language skills that one needs to read a book is so far way beyond conversational Hebrew. But through the methods of Ulpan Or and the fact that the use of technology and streaming video and YouTubes and so many different other aspects of the learning, it's just been incredibly successful. And I during the pandemic, it's over 2 years now, I've started an hour a week, and my sense of how much I've progressed is incredible. It's really huge.
All right. Dr. Kamenetsky, thank you so much again for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Now, the winter holiday is now just around the corner, and just in the nick of time, Jewish-Israeli history coming alive in a first-of-its-kind way. Published just in time for Hanukkah, archaeologists discovering a massive cache of 2,200-year-old silver coins near the Dead Sea, which experts say is the first in-situ physical evidence of Jews fleeing to the Judean desert prior to the Maccabean revolt against King Antiochus IV Epiphanes. As part of the find in a cave in the Daraga Stream Nature Reserve, an impeccably preserved wooden box with a purple-dyed fabric, some wool stuffing, and 15 silver tetradrachma coins, which in today's terms would have been equivalent to about $10,000. So IAA official Eitan Klein explaining that in general, when we find a cache of coins like this, it tells the story of war. People don't otherwise run off and hide their life savings. Further, again, with the coins dating back to around 170 BCE, the time of Egyptian King Ptolemy VI, the evidence is perfectly corroborating the biblical story of the Hanukkah revolts, and for the first time in its original hiding place, as opposed to on the antiquities market after having been looted and disconnected from its archaeological context.
The latest coin in the hoard was dated to 170 BCE. That's a very special moment in the history of the land of Israel. Actually, it's before the decrees of Antiochus against the Jewish religion. They fled to hiding places in the desert. Eventually, the Seleucids went after them and killed all of them. A report came to the king's men and to the forces in Jerusalem, the city of David, that men who had violated the command of the king had gone down to the hiding places in the desert.
Now let's take a look at the weather forecast. Tonight, the forecast is calling for a mix of clear and partly cloudy skies along with cooler temperatures, an average low of 11 degrees Celsius or 52 Fahrenheit. And then tomorrow, a mix of partly cloudy skies and scattered showers overhead with top temperatures of 21 Celsius or 71 Fahrenheit. And that's all for today's news. For more updates from Israel on all of your devices, check out our ILTV channels on YouTube, Facebook, and Telegram, and subscribe to our ILTV newsletter. I'm Aaron Porras. Be well, and thank you so much for watching.